All right, that's mic 1. Cool. When you unmute mic 2, it doesn't do anything because that's the Discord mic. There's no one on Discord. It's just me here. So, hi, hello. I am. Basically, we are back for another week here in August. I would say life is starting to return to normal after Gen Con, but we are still pushing, still getting things done, still having exciting things happening. So, uh, that means the fact that things have not yet slowed down. So there's a lot of things happening basically behind the scenes here at Lorelink. Some of it's good, some of it is stressful. Well, basically, we're working through all of it. So, what are we talking about here today? Well, today I'm going to switch to this thing so you can see me. Whoop. Hi, look at me. I have my Korok space, Hyrule Korok space program shirt on because we're talking about a space RPG, a science fiction RPG to be precise. Today we're going to be talking about Starfinder Second Edition, more particularly the Starfinder Second Edition playtest rule set. That got released just right around Gen Con. Basically, physical copies of the book were available for purchase at Gen Con. These actually cost money because physical objects cost money. So basically, it's about yay big. We'll talk about why it's relatively skinny and narrow here in a second. If you are interested in checking it out, there was a Humble Bundle that had it as part of it for a while, but the PDF for this, basically for the playtest is free. It's a playtest. They want you to play it. So basically, if you want just a digital copy of it, the PDF is available for free on the Paizo website. If you're watching this on the YouTube channel, it is a link. Basically, a link in the description down below. Actually has a link to the page where the playtest is available. This is, of course, assuming that you're watching this video sometime in 2024, early 2025, because obviously I'm going to assume that once Second Edition fully comes out, I believe it's scheduled for Gen Con next year, it will be, basically that will probably be taken down and replaced with the full rule set. So, first things first. As I just said, it's a relatively narrow book. Because it is, basically, I say narrow. It is narrow for a Pathfinder rulebook. Player Core and GM Core are obviously much thicker books. Probably, how many pages is this one? 250 pages for this one. I'm fairly certain that Core, Player Core is probably bumping up there at 500, if not 600. That is the Humble Bundle. Is that still going? I forgot to check that. If it is, it's got a bunch of cool, basically, if you end up liking what we're talking about here and you want a bunch of cool Starfinder content, that has a ton of 8 more days. So you have until a little bit after I stream next, to purchase that. And that has the PDF, which the PDF is free, so you're not paying for that, but it's got a bunch of really cool stuff, like flip mats and adventure, basically some of the adventures from Starfinder First Edition. Obviously, that isn't directly compatible with Starfinder Second Edition. We'll talk but it's probably got a lot of cool ideas, a lot of cool stuff you can transition. And converting stuff from Starfinder First Edition to Second Edition, converting stuff from Pathfinder First Edition to Second Edition, is fairly well documented at this point. Basically, I'm sure they will have similar resources for converting stuff from First to Second. Additionally, all the stories and all the ideas and the flip mats and maps and images and things like that are always compatible. So those resources are worth picking up for nothing else. Oh, hey, it's a 20. So all those resources available. It also has Hero Lab stuff. for Starfinder First Edition, maybe Second Edition. I can't remember if they had Hero Lab stuff for Second Edition. I'm double checking it right now. No, they do not have Hero Lab stuff for the Second Edition. Oh, there it is. Yes, Hero Lab Starfinder Second Edition play for character creation and vault content. For Second Edition, it's not as 100% necessary. It's nice. But definitely, if you're going to run anything Starfinder First Edition, having Hero Lab will be it'll be a blessing. Because Starfinder First Edition was definitely more of a finicky, play basically system. So, but let's get into this. Let's talk about Starfinder and Pathfinder and what all of this is before we talk about things you should buy or not buy. So, Pathfinder came out. Gosh, I want to even think about how many years ago, and was essentially D&D 3.5 redone because D&D 4th edition had come out and people had complained that it was too video gamey, etc., etc. And WotC was having some trouble dealing with what they wanted D&D to be at that point, and so they were still kind of trying to figure it out what was going on with it. They were dealing with backlashes against basically they didn't really like digital copies of things and PDFs were bad. So basically Pathfinder kind of came out during that dark age. I say dark age, it slipped from like the first most popular RPG system to briefly being the second most popular RPG system for like a period of a season. But basically for D&D terms, that was huge. But so Pathfinder came out. They were basically produced by Paizo. Paizo is a company that originally produced a series of dungeons, basically a series of magazines for basically physical, but back when physical magazines were still barely hanging on as a thing. That they had cool dungeons and cool adventures and things like that, and they were very popular. And so when D&D, WotC made the decision when they moved to 4th edition that they weren't going to have Paizo do any of that anymore, so shut all that down. So Paizo essentially went, well, cool, we've got a bunch of people who are really good at creating content for D&D 3.5. Why don't we just go ahead and create our own very adjacent to D&D 3.5 system and produce it because there's obviously a gap in the market. We'll fix some of the issues with D&D 3.5 and let's make it a little bit, add our own twists on things, add our own world and world building behind it. And we'll call it Pathfinder. Pathfinder came out, was a huge success. People really liked what they had done, a lot of the stuff they had fixed, etc., etc. And so Pathfinder went on a similar journey to kind of what D&D 3.5 did, with basically lots of mini books on, oh, here's some additional classes, here's some additional spells, here's some additional items. Basically, we'll sell you books for all those things. Here are some cool adventures. Basically, the big thing they did is they took all their knowledge they had gained from developing writing adventures for D&D 3.5, and they basically turned it into a subscription-based system where you could subscribe to entire adventure paths, which would be 5-book arcs that would take characters from 1 to 15 or 20, and basically take them through some of the cool stuff they had built into their world. Basically, some really trying to build out some interesting set pieces, some dungeon crawls, some battles for godhood, some basically cities under siege, cross-continental journeys, and murder investigations, etc., etc. And they made some really cool set pieces, and in addition, they had an organized play system, which also helped build out their world. And basically, essentially did a good job of essentially firmly grounded Pathfinder as a really solid system. So, as time goes on, they obviously wanted to take that system and move it into basically kind of move that towards basically they wanting to add more stuff to it. They had kind of plumbed it dry, as it were. They had done the super high level stuff. They had done a bunch of other stuff, and they were obviously feeling probably a little constrained by what they'd built and were wanting to move to essentially a second edition. If basically from a mechanics standpoint, if not just from basically from hey, we need to put out new books to make people buy more books so people spend more money. That's a thing. Every company is going to have an entire division of their company, which called the accounting department, which really likes it when you bring in more money, especially when you want to keep paying people. Really good idea. But rather than launch immediately into Pathfinder Second Edition, they decided, hey, we've heard people talking about they're basically wanting a more science fiction version of this. Basically, we've kind of they dabbled a little bit with it in some of their plot lines in Pathfinder First Edition. Some of those there were stories where mysterious androids had crashed on the planets, and so you ended up with this weird sort of half basically Dundar the Barbarian sort of advanced future technology, basically future tech, basically barbarian, basically future technology. Yeah, brain. Basically medieval technology, Renaissance technology, swords and sorcery interacting with the ruins of a previous future advanced civilization. So they had dabbled a little bit with that. They had gotten some fairly good results. They had known the fact that previously in basically in D&D had definitely dabbled in some sci-fi stuff. So basically, they used to have an adventure series, basically an adventure path called Star Frontiers, which was essentially D&D in space. Um, so they decided, what if we took this second basically what if we took these ideas we've had for second edition that we're not quite done with yet, that we're wanting to figure out how they're going to work, and they're different enough mechanically from Pathfinder First Edition that we can't include it as part of First Pathfinder First Edition as a new rule book. We're going to have to put it into its own series, so we'll call it Starfinder. Set it deep into the future, so that we can separate it from Pathfinder, so we don't mess around with Pathfinder's basically all of the stuff that Pathfinder has done to world build, because the Pathfinder world building has lots of locked mystery boxes scattered throughout the place. Like, what's going on with this lich? Who basically what happened to this god? Will this god ever escape from their evil prison? Etc. Etc. And basically, but they didn't want to destroy all those by taking it place in the future and having to answer all of those questions. So they invented something called the gap, which is essentially everybody woke up one morning and realized, hey, we can't remember the past 1,000 years. It's just gone from everybody in the universe's memory. Also, we've lost things that were important, like the planet that we rescued, a planet that both the Pathfinder takes part on, is just gone. Um, so basically, so we don't have to answer any questions about what the current state of the planet is or what things have happened. Um, I love the fact that the music just decided that it didn't need to keep playing. That was cool. Hang on 1 second. Where did you go? There we go. Let's switch it to a different one to see if that plays any better. Okay, so basically, Starfinder First Edition had a bunch of really interesting ideas mixed in mechanically, as well as having some really cool world building, because they weren't attached to Pathfinder First Edition anymore. They put that gap year in, they put that gap session in. So cool, we could do whatever we want, and they did. They created weird new races and interesting different classes and disciplines and different types of magic and how magic could work and interact. They changed the way that hit points worked, and they changed the way that other systems work together. You have different forms of armor class, because they're like, what if we had two different, because now we have to deal with, you're in the future, so everybody in the future of course has guns, and maybe basically, and so now we have to deal with balancing guns in a system that was built mostly around melee combat. And so they threw some really interesting things, and they're kind of essentially throwing some things against the wall and seeing what worked. It was met with mixed success. People really like the world building. It's got some incredibly cool races and classes and ideas in it. But the biggest problem Starfinder First Edition suffered from is the fact that this game had some really complex, crunchy mechanical systems where you're like, I have hit points and I have stamina points and I have two forms of armor class. And then if you get into a ship, or a Mac, heaven help you, because then the math gets even weirder and more complicated. And you're left with a lot of, basically, a lot of the Pathfinder stuff is still there, but it just basically it struggled, and it was basically sitting people down and being like, hey, let's play Starfinder. Turned out basically that first session was always a little bit of a slog, because you were having to walk people through weird math stuff that they really wanted to just sit down. So Paizo took all the lessons they learned from Starfinder and went, cool, some things work, some things different. Let's throw all the stuff that we learned about new systems, things like that, into a little thing called Pathfinder Second Edition, which was, and then eventually Pathfinder Second Edition Remastered, which was then basically saying, hey, let's fix everything that's going on with, basically, let's fix a lot of what's break ties with D&D 3.5. It was cool when we did it, but the people, basically, TTRPG design has gone forward. We've learned a lot, and we don't need, basically, because they built up a successful audience, they're like, hey, we don't need to be D&D, but in a different world. We can be our own system. And so they kept some of the core conceits. You still have your 6 stats: strength, dex, intelligence, constitution, wisdom, charisma. Those are still there. They still run 1 to 18 until you get the remaster, and then they just forget about 1 to 18. They're like, you just need the bonuses. Ignore the numbers are complicated anyway. We have AC. You're rolling a d20. You're adding a number to it. You're checking. Cool. But now we can add some other cool things in. Like critical hits are now, basically, rather than rolling a 20, then rolling it again, and if you fail on the second roll, you just, nothing interesting happened. So the excitement of rolling a 20 wasn't as great. Now it's take that die. If you're great, succeed by more than 10, you crit. If you failed by more than 10, you crit fail. If you roll a 20, you basically advance your success rate by 1. So it goes from a success to a crit success. It could go from a failure to a success if you're trying to do something immensely impossible, and 1s do the same thing in the other direction. So you could still hit on a 1, you just have to be doing something you're really, 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 really good at. And basically they're like actions, basically there's a whole lot, basically the action basically was a big giant mess with actions, reactions, free actions. Basically, you have movement and standard actions, and all of those were just basically like, okay, this is a standard can become a movement, which can become a free. And then there were other types of answers which weren't, basically there were reactions and basically other things. It was a complicated mess, and so they went, you get 3 actions, done. If you want to move, spend an action to move. You want to attack, spend an action to attack. Sure, that means you can attack 3 times in a round. Whoa, that's crazy. Well, no, we balanced it, but we balanced it. The more times you swing, the harder it is for you to hit. Cool, we'll balance all of that out. So Pathfinder Second Edition came out and was, much like First Edition, a really big success, because people really liked, they had adopted the world, and so they were more willing to deal with, and basically this more modern approach to TTRPGs really helped with getting people to basically get into the system, and made the system easy. It made it much more teachable. You could sit a person down and be like, during your turn, you get 3 actions. How many times can I move? 3. How many times can I attack? 3. Doesn't matter. Basically, do these things. Basically, the symbols right here on the page tells you how many actions the thing takes up. If it's a reaction, you get 1 of those. It's got that symbol. It's a free action. You get as many of those as you want. It's got this symbol. Done. Just go from there, basically, and build your character from that point going forward. Really easy to teach. Really interesting. The downside was, of course, it was an awesome system and everybody loved it. And then you'd go back to playing Starfinder and you'd be like, oh, right. Oh, that's right. I've got these double hit point systems, and I'm still dealing with the movement and standards, and oh, man, basically, I really like the world. And basically, they basically get to a spaceship, and it's just a giant, chunky mess of math, and you're like, this just doesn't feel as nice and smooth as Pathfinder Second Edition. And so people were like, hey, when's Starfinder Second Edition coming out? And so a lot of that kind of killed a lot of momentum that Starfinder First Edition had, because everyone was like, we all know that Starfinder Second Edition is going to come out at some point because they've got to improve on what they have, and it just wasn't fun basically it wasn't as fun anymore going back and playing it compared to when you're playing Pathfinder Second Edition. So eventually, Starfinder Second Edition has finally come out, and it's now basically we now have the playtest rulebook. So that brings me back to what we were talking about originally, which is, why is this book so slim for a Paizo game? Did they manage to keep everything under control and not have 6,000 choices that you have to sort through? No. What happened is they said Starfinder Second Edition is just essentially an add-on. Basically, it's based 100% on Pathfinder Second Edition Remastered. It is based on those rules. It is using that same core set of rules and mechanics. So the reason why this book is so small is because, as it says right down here in the bottom, this product requires Pathfinder Player Core and GM Core to use. It is essentially basically it has just all the new stuff that Starfinder introduces, but the good news is that means, yes, finally now Starfinder has the much easier to teach Pathfinder Second Edition rule sets. Basically, all the cool iconography is there. You've lost some of those weird things that made it feel a little bit more space-like. Like, you no longer have two forms of armor class. You don't have to worry about if something hitting you was kinetic or energy. You're like, basically, physical or energy. I think it was KE and PE. I can't even remember. It was KC and EC, I think, were the two. Kinetic armor class, KAC, kinetic armor class, and EAC, energy armor class. You no longer have to worry about that anymore. But it does mean the fact that basically you no longer have that differentiation of, oh, hey, some armor, basically you're picking your armor based on circumstances. You no longer have weird hit point systems. So you don't have to deal, basically you just have hit points. You go down to 0, you're in your death saves, make the death saves, get out of it, you're wounded. Basically go back down, you're dying. Basically once you hit dying 4, you're out. Fairly straightforward. But so that is but it does mean you have to have Pathfinder Core, you have to have Player Core, and you have to have GM Core to run it. You have to have a good understanding of Pathfinder Second Edition in order to run Starfinder Second Edition. They have said, and it says multiple times in here, that the final book for Starfinder Second Edition will not require you to have Player Core and GM Core to use. Everything that you will need to run Starfinder Second Edition will be included in the Starfinder Core rulebook. So, from that standpoint, hey, that's nice. Basically, if you're wanting to get in, you're like, all I care about is Starfinder, you could buy just the Starfinder books and you're fine. That said, everything that's in Pathfinder can now, it's in Pathfinder Second Edition, can now be put 1-to-1 into basically Starfinder Second Edition. So if you want to run an adventure on Galarian in the past, where a starship from another alien world crashes in and some of the aliens from this book with their technology start running around in your world, you could do it. You have all the tech, you have all the feats, all of that is right in here. Same if you want to run a time travel adventure where your Starfinder cast and characters get transported mysteriously to the past and have to deal with running around in dungeons and dragons. Probably in a different order so you don't run into lawsuits. Dragons and dungeons. You can do that. They're compatible. Basically, spells and things like that will work the same way. Obviously, there's some setting stuff that you have to deal with. Stuff that is listed, basically, Starfinder does set up that anything that is from Pathfinder has an archaic tag to it, which means it does not interact with a lot of the cool new technology. You can't just, basically, there's a lot of armor upgrades and weapon upgrades that are basically in these books. You can't, basically, if something has the archaic tag, it's not compatible with any of those upgrades. Basically, archaic armor also leaves you exposed, meaning the fact that while all future Starfinder armor is basically anything beyond basically a basic level has environmental stuff into it. So if you get thrown on an airlock in your armor, assuming you have your armor, you're fine. Basically, you don't have to deal with this. You're like, oh, hey, yeah, I can survive vacuum. I can survive in the vacuum space. Basically, basic level stuff. Basically, in your basic level armor. Basically, if you're running around in chainmail and you get thrown out of an airlock, well, you're going to have a bad day. Doesn't work as well. That said, it's really, really cool. Because what this has enabled them to do is basically it has freed them to bring in a lot of the really interesting, neat world stuff that was in Starfinder, kind of locked behind Starfinder Second Edition or Starfinder First Edition, and you get to play with it without worrying about the cumbersome overhead stuff that Starfinder. So basically that Starfinder First Edition added. So what is that? Basically, it also doesn't necessarily just feel like, oh, that basically now it's really just Pathfinder in space. They've done a really good job of putting a lot of stuff into basically of changing the power curve, changing the setting, changing the basically, and making it feel like a science fiction game and all the things that come along with that, as opposed to just being swords and sorcery now in a spaceship. What that does mean, basically, it means they get to break the rules. Basically, at least Pathfinder design rules. So first of all, they're like, okay, we no longer have to stick. Basically, in Starfinder, you don't have to stick to having just your typical fantasy races: elves, dwarves, gnomes, halflings, some kind of dragon race usually gets thrown in there, orcs, some kind of lizard folk, etc., etc. Now you can have basically you're like, okay, here's you start off, you get androids just to start with. Cool. So you've got all the interesting things going on with androids. You've got these guys. Floating jellyfish-like beings that have evolved on the gas giants, rewrite their own genetic code instinctively at will, shaping their body into a stunning array of unique forms. Those are just a base race in Starfinder. Note the fact that they're also a base race that just comes with fly. Because you're in a space science fiction setting, basically no longer do you have to worry about the fact that you don't have to worry about, hey, if I give this rate flight, it's going to completely break the setting in every dungeon and everything like that. No, flying is something that you're in a science fiction setting. Everybody can fly. Eventually, you can either you start with maybe you're an alien and you have flight. Maybe you're in a zero-G situation and you can fly from that. Maybe you have a bit of tech that gives you that. Maybe you just have wings, as we'll see another race just has wings that eventually can just get fly off of. So like humans are here and they're their usual, hey, we can do everything. Flexible selves. You've got these guys. These guys just have 4 arms. It's normal. It's okay. You can have 4 arms. I mean, whereas a lot of times you have a lot of talk in like balancing and things like that in D&D, where you're like, oh no, we can't have a race with 4 arms. Well, we get the Thri-Kreen eventually, but we have to make them so that we have to keep them inside this box in order to make sure they don't. Oops, sorry, hit the mic. In order to make sure that they don't screw everything up. They're like, I don't know, we got 4 arms, we'll balance it. It's fine. There are all sorts of weird things. They've got a race of psychic people, Shunta. You've got a race of cat people, because hey, everyone loves cat people. Basically, they're just giant, humanoid feline species from a nearby star system. You've got the insect people, the Shirin. Note the wings. Yeah, eventually they can just fly. It's okay. Just making their debut in Starfinder Second Edition as a core race, it's the Skittermander. The Skittermander are essentially to Starfinder what goblins were to Pathfinder. In terms of they're a race of creatures who are going to show up and are going to show up and throw chaos into whatever. One of their traits is just overeager enthusiasm. They're basically their backstory is the fact that they are their languages are Common and Vesk. The Vesk are a different race in this series. The Vesk are essentially fulfilling the role of your Klingons. Um, basically, they are your incredibly warlike race that shows up and kicks things around and basically doesn't take no for an answer and basically has a military empire, etc., etc. So, but basically notice that they share a language with those Skittermanders. That's because of the fact that the Vesk wandered around and conquered various planets and things like that, and were like, haha, we've taken over this planet, haha, we've taken over this planet. And then they showed up at the Skittermander planet, they're like, haha, we will conquer you. And the Skittermanders went, cool, we love it. Someone else is going to take over and be in charge? We're all for it. Great, thanks. The Vesk kind of went, what? They're like, yeah, we're part of your empire now. Cool, we're in. Awesome. And the Vesk are like, oh, okay. Packed up all their military equipment and kind of sadly went, are you sure you don't want rebellion? And they're like, nah, we're cool. And they left. So now the Vesk are stuck with the Skittermanders. They are essentially this race of overeager creatures who are incredibly inquisitive and enthusiastic about everything. And they tend to latch on any Vesk because the Vesk said they were taking care of them now. Cool. Basically, that means they don't have to make those decisions anymore. That leaves them more time to do things that they want to deal with. And so you will oftentimes have, and I believe there is a picture at the top of this section. Yes. This is very definitely a common scene of Vesk and Skittermanders. Basically, it is a Vesk maybe he's attempting to GM this campaign. Maybe he's trying to do some serious work while the Skittermanders are playing, and the Skittermanders are just having a great time. And they're just here for basically enthusiasm, and it's getting great. They're here for a great time. So, and basically a lot of the Vesk that are player characters tend to be some of those who have broken off from the main basically the main army, basically the main military thing, and they're no longer kind of like, think Worf in Star Trek is your default answer here, of course. Basically, but still, which still means the fact that you end up with these any Skittermanders that you come across as a GM, you just throw them at your Vesk, and your Vesk has to deal with them. Because they love you, the Vesk. They're great. So, basically, that's what I'm talking basically in terms of this is cool stuff that you get. I protest. I am not a merry man. Exactly. And so that's what you basically... Oh, there's one more. There are a couple more races after the Vesk. Because you can't have a race of cat people without having a race of basically rodent people. So now you've got the Yosoki, once known as rat folk, clever, flexible, tiny little guys, basically who are basically have a slight tendency towards basically mechanics and other stuff, but they get fun things like do they still have it or did they lose it? I haven't. There's scent. You have sense. Yeah, basically thing. Small bones mean that you can fit through anything. Cheek pouches. There they are. Your cheeks are stretchy. You can store up to 4 items of light bulk or less in these cheek pouches. So yes, you can do the hamster thing of just shoving things in there. Basically, and you've got you need something that's right there. Yes, cheek pouches. So basically, then you can get into the basically Paisa knows their audience. What if we made an entire race of just incredibly kind of goth people? You have the Borai, who are basically, this is a versatile heritage, which is something that Pathfinder Second Edition added in, where they decided these are add-ons to existing heritage, ancestries, as it were. So, in this case, these are simultaneously living and dead, a corpse reanimated by its own soul into something just barely living. Despite being corporeal, undead Abori's body is alive and functions as a living shell that protects their tattered undead cell, making them something altogether unique. Meaning that you could take any of the races we just talked about from, basically, you could have Yusoki, you could have human, you can have Vesk, and now they're just kind of somewhat living, somewhat dead, basically versions of them. Yes, you could have a Borai Skittermander. You want to be really bizarre. And so, basically, you kind of, is this anything like Reborn from D&D? Somewhat. Basically, it's like Reborn. It's like Revenants. Where you have something where it's basically Dampier is another one from Pathfinder, which is another example. Essentially, they don't have any, basically, you know that all the other ones had hit point listings and size and speed. They don't get any of those. They basically, you pick your main classes, your main ancestry as necessary, and then you kind of add on this heritage, and it gives you access to a couple of other features that you wouldn't normally have access to. But the downsides are you have to deal with the fact that you're kind of undead. And so you have basically have additional feats you can take from that in addition to what your normal one. And then there are the Prismeni, who are basically you can kind of say it's the flip side. It's those who have been touched by the realm of beyond. And so they've been stuck with them. And now they've got some weird special powers from that. It's a cool way of giving your character some really it's an interesting highlights, if nothing else. So you have all of those, and that's just talking about what you get in terms of ancestries and things like that. When you're looking through, basically, as you keep going, you've got the classes as well. Basically, you've got backgrounds, which basically, obviously, backgrounds are going to be completely different for, basically, in a science fiction setting as opposed to a fantasy setting. Some of them are going to be somewhat similar. Like smuggler is basically smuggler and outlaw and basically icon and basically street rat. And some of those trooper, where you're going to have some ones which are going to obviously be a little bit different. You're going to have vid gamer. Gaming is more than a hobby for you. The hobby, whether you're a professional player, game designer, infosphere influencer, just an enthusiast who's mastered every vid game worth installing. You're a video game connoisseur who can spot virtual creations without a second glance. So you get some cool, interesting backgrounds to reflect the fact that you're in a different setting. And then the classes, again, basically because of the fact that they wanted to make sure this didn't just feel like Pathfinder in space, the classes, while there are some things which are close, Envoy is kind of close to Fighter, Operative is kind of close to Rogue, though Envoy is a little bit more charismatic. Maybe it's closer to a Bard? But it's kind of a bard fighter type. And soldier, of course, is your fighter type. Witch Warper is kind of your mage, but they've got some other weird stuff. They're not just straight up wizards memorizing spells and things like that. Mystic is kind of your cleric. It's got the healing role, but they're not necessarily as connected to just a basically just a particular deity, and that's what they're stuck with, but they can be. And then you get some of the weirder stuff, like basically operatives have things like moving around. Your envoys are going around buffing and basically pointing things out and saying, kill those things or get these things or fall back. So they're a little bit more flexible than the bard. And then Solarian is your basically not even a paladin. It's your hybrid fighter. In the fact that it's got some really interesting basically mechanics and tweaks. Basically, of all the classes, this is probably the most unique to Starfinder. It's got some really interesting back end, basically some interesting tweaks and things like that it plays with in order to stick between a solar powered fire based thing and a gravity based void type thing. So it gives you some interesting stuff mechanically to bounce back and forth between. But again, basically, it doesn't just feel like it is Pathfinder in space, because these classes are remixed enough that basically, and remember, just because you have these classes doesn't mean you can't also include the classes from the base book. Do you want to have a sorcerer running around in Starfinder? You can. You could just take the rules from sorcerer, from basically from Pathfinder, from Player Core, and just play them in Starfinder, and they're there. They're compatible. All the checks will match up. Now, will there be some stuff that was really cool for a sorcerer that everyone just kind of goes, you just gained the ability to fly? Oh, okay, cool. It took you a while, but you know, we've got grab belts over here you could have just picked up. And so they even talk about that in the playtest, where they're like, yeah, there are going to be some things that we basically, when you go through them, as you discover them, are these things aren't as cool or useful anymore in a Starfinder setting, because Starfinder changes up. You note the fact that there really isn't a ranger class in here. That's basically, there isn't grab felts. Oh, close captioning. Well, you know. So basically, you've got a range, basically, because everybody's got guns. basically, basically, you don't need a guy who's really good at bows. Everybody's good at guns. Like, it's a little bit weird that basically if you're using a sword, in fact. The Solarian gets kind of weird because they tend to be a little bit more melee. If you want to play a ranger, pull it out of the core book and just plop it down. But just realize the fact that it will be, some of its really cool feats aren't as necessarily in no Power Rangers. Aren't as necessary, or basically as cool or as useful in a Starfinder setting. Same with Monk. Being a master of hand-to-hand combat in a world where everybody has guns, you're really particular, and boy, howdy, you better hope you can close, but if you can't, well, you're going to have problems. So, basically, the system is weirdly, hey, Wolf Mom, the system is kind of balanced more, basically has to deal with throwing that balance shift in there. You have to deal with the fact that everybody has a ranged attack. So your soldiers and your envoys and your operatives all have to deal with that fact that, oh, hey, everybody's got ranged. Everybody's got ranged combat. So what abilities do we give them to make their stuff seem cool? What do we give them to basically make them be able to deal with that fact in a world that basically where basically being able to close basically may not be something that you can just do anymore. You need to get in there quicker. You need to basically, if you're a melee combatant, you have to be able to get it. You fool, we all have guns. Yeah, exactly. It's a lot of basically like, oh, hey, basically, and so a lot of people are like, wow, some of these, basically putting some of these classes back into Pathfinder would be kind of tweaked. It's like, yes, because the envoy and the fighter and the soldier and things like that come from a world where everybody has ranged combat, and so they have to be amped up to deal with that fact. When someone can hit you with a, basically from super far away with a sniper rifle, you have to have a class which can be able to deal with that, and it's going to basically, you dump them into a world where people are running around with swords and a few people have bows and maybe a mage or two, and you're like, oh wow, okay, I can handle this. This is easy. And so basically you're going to have to make some tweaks if you do that. You get fun stuff like get 'em, saw it coming. Basically, I do love the fact that Paizo does a good job of making some of their abilities and things like that interesting and different than just you basically move forward 10 feet and hit something. You're like, okay, get 'em is the basic envoy, because the envoy is kind of the bard support class fighter type. You single out an enemy for you and your allies to focus attacks on. This concentrates on weakens the enemy's defense. Select a creature within 60 feet of you that you can see. The creature takes a -1 circumstance penalty to AC and reflex save until the beginning of your next turn. Basically, that -1 is key because of the fact that it means that others who are giving you +1 boosts, basically you can stack those boosts without worrying about it. Basically, saw it come. Basically, where's the... I think it's Envoy. It's probably basically showing what you got. Basically, I think it is. What? PDF searching is slow. It is an operative feat. Yeah, there's an operative feat at second level just called Kill Steal, which basically someone else hits an opponent. Basically, you're like, oh, I can get it. And basically, you have a kill steal reaction, which lets you shoot at something they've already shot at. Basically, the flavoring is great. I do like basically they always have some. Basically, I wish I shared one earlier with the team, which is called doom scrolling, which basically allows you to basically take over technology in a certain radius and just display horrible news that everyone basically has to stop and take a look at and try to figure out what's going on. Basically because current technology keeps you super informed. You're like, oh no, a starship blew up and something is to blame, and you're like, oh no, I gotta know about that, and so you're staring at it, fascinated. So you get fun stuff like that. The Solarian is definitely the weirdest one. You get things like Attune, which lets you say I am. Basically, then you get like Nimbus Surge, which lets you pull weapons. Basically, solar weapons. Basically, you get solar weapons, which allow you to pull things out. You have Photon attuned and Gravity attuned. It's a little bit more bookkeeping. But it gives you some really interesting stuff, being able to push and pull stuff all over the battlefield, set things on fire, basically build up and then explode out. So you get some really cool positioning stuff that you don't normally get in Pathfinder Second Edition. At least not until we get the Warlord class coming out here soon. Soldier, of course, just gets basically, I'm going to beat people up. So basically, skills-wise, the only two new skills they added were computers and piloting, because everybody should have basically piloting is, hey, do you have the ability to actually pilot ships and look at stuff? Computers is, hey, can you hack stuff and use stuff that way? And one piece of advice they do offer, and this is something we're going to talk a little bit more when we're looking at planning, is whereas in Pathfinder, basically getting information is fairly, you're bouncing between photon and graviton because you're messing around with star stuff concept. Yep. But the computers and piloting let you get is basically computers let you basically deal with stuff like, my brain is bouncing around too much. Pathfinder, basically in Pathfinder, you want to give your players a piece of information. You either have to have a book or a letter or some physical thing that's laying around that they have to go find. They have to go open something up and flip through it and find it. And the only thing in that book is just what's in that book. The only letters are letters which are there. And letters are always kind of weird because you're like, hey, this person has a letter which gives away their plots. Why is it here and why hasn't it been sent yet? Oh, we just happened to catch them before they sent it. Computers give you a completely different way of being able to get information to your players, and it's also a different avenue that your players can explore on their own, where basically like, oh, I'm going to hack this or that, I'm going to hack these systems, or I'm going to open these things and things like that. And that skill can give you access to stuff. You program action. That gives you create formulas for tech items, so you can create things with it. So it turns into oh, hey, I want to look up a piece of information. I want to basically find out if they have any information on this. I want a way of finding out where stuff could be in this building, etc., etc. Cool. Computers can become that skill, which gives you a tool as the GM to feed information to your players, guide your players. And you have to and it's another thing you have to deal with. You have to plan around that. You're going to have to plan around the fact that, hey, your players basically, you're like, okay, there's this dungeon, there's these doors, you need to get this key card. It's like, well, can I just hack it? Oh, yeah, that's a thing. And you need to come up with a reason, basically, why hacking it isn't just something simple or easy. Operability for you to study someone. It takes time if you can see them directly. You can do it via computers, checking about them being present. Yeah. Basically, it gives you that, hey, we can look stuff up, we can access information, stuff that we kind of think about on a day-to-day basis in our actual with your actual lives. Basically, oh hey, I want to find out about this person. Well, I'm just going to Google search them on my phone. Why would that be any different than basically if I go into the far future? In this game where there's even more technology and cool stuff. So now you have access to those things, which you have to, but you also have to deal with the piloting. They did mention the fact that it says in the book, hey, we're not dealing with vehicles yet. Basically, vehicles are going to be, we want to deal with the basics first. Vehicles and vehicle combat is going to be its own thing. Piloting is just your basic role at this point to get you from point A to point B and how comfortable you do it, or deal with really quick kind of one-off simple emergencies. Hey, you need to dodge this oncoming thing. Give me a piloting check. You need to match the spin of your ship to the other ship so you can dock. Make a piloting check. Set a DC, make a piloting check, and you've got successes, you've got crit successes, and you've got failures, you've got crit failures, and you've got that whole system to give you an idea of what's going on with those basic things. So you don't have to worry as much about, okay, they're going to get into this thing and they're going to it doesn't deal with okay, they have some of it here, like attempt a piloting check. It's got a success. The vehicle moves up to its speed. If you spend a single action, 2 actions, basically moves up to twice its speed. 3 actions, basically now you're taking reckless actions. You're basically taking a penalty on your piloting check to maintain control of the vehicle. Vehicle's doing 3 times its speed in a straight line. Basically in its current heading. Note the fact that it's 1, 2, and 3 actions to get 1, 2, and 3 times the speed. Basically, this doesn't really. Basically, you're like, okay. Basically, you can't. Basically, affects. Basically, you're spending 3 actions to get 3 times the speed, though you could spend 1 action 3 times and get the single speed. Without having to worry about making penalties and failures. Basically, obviously, the system is going to have some tweaks and other stuff. Basically, they said that they're going to basically introduce the playtest for it later. Basically, Starfinder Second Edition reached the point, or First Edition reached the point where they had cool things like mecha, as well as basically starships and starship combat. Mecha introduced cool things like, speaking of the Power Ranger stuff we talked about earlier, you can have multiple pilots and basically take multiple people commanding different parts of a mecha, so you can have some cool things. But remember when I talked about math getting crunchy and weird and basically painful? Starship stuff was that major point. It was literally at the point where, especially if you're running, say, an organized play thing, which has hard time limits, a lot of the GMs would kind of just shrug and say, give me a couple rolls and you make it or you don't make it. You make it. Because the problem with a lot of Starship stuff is basically, whereas if you have an encounter when you're in a wagon on your way to something and you're like, oh, we just leave. Okay. You gallop away. You can basically usually just say we gallop away and you leave the combat. You lose a combat space and your ship blows up and you're dead. You can't walk to the next town when the next town is light years away. Basically, so the GMs were faced with if they fail this encounter, the entire scenario is over. Goodbye. And so that meant the fact that they had to deal with either we do this incredibly complicated system to basically determine this, or we hand wave it and just say they get to where they're going and move on, because if we don't, the adventure just doesn't work anymore. So hopefully they will fix the. They have heard those complaints from all their GMs and people who worked on Starfinder Organized Play. So I know they've heard those complaints, and so they will hopefully fix them. Starship Combat Faithful, basically, the problem is that it's a really weird system. How do you deal with watching one guy move a ship around the map? That's not really exciting. If you're all 6 of you there and one person's the pilot, one person's moving the ship on the map, and that's it. That's what you're doing. It's just like it's not a fun activity for the group. And so they will have to deal with that system as they come to it. So you have all your usual skills and things like that. Then you get into the equipment and things like that, where basically equipment and things, basically feats, which are going to have your basically your interesting, basically kind of tweak stuff for running things for Starfinder. Combat hack, like, oh hey, I want to actually hack somebody in the middle of combat. I need to take that feat. That method actor, so you've got basically acting and things like that. Phishing expertise, so you're skilled at phishing fraud schemes that disguise your info, basically that disguise your info sphere accounts, digital fingerprint, and other data to fool users into giving you valuable information. So, freaker. So basically all that to say, then you have equipment and things like that, and you have tech, and you have all of your ranged weapons and grenades and things like that, and armor upgrades, and dealing with radiation, and things like that. Radiation is still I believe it is a poison and a disease. But we're not here to talk about just that. Basically, I do like the fact that you do have these focus spells here. So you got, basically, this is one of the ones I'm just going to call out. Anthem. You compose a tangle of cosmic melodies into an anthem for your bounded companions. All bonded creatures in the area gain a +1 status bonus to attack and damage rolls, and also gain a +1 status bonus to save status against effects that cause fascinating and confused. So yes, you can basically, you've got remix. You've remixed the Song of the Spirits into a catchy dance beat. The target becomes quickened and can use the extra action to interact, stride, or step. Shuffle, repeat. Basically, you're literally dealing with what's the name of that character from Overwatch? The DJ. I can't remember their name, but essentially you got that character giving buffs to your party member, Lucio. Yep, that's right. Thank you, Lucio. So basically, so you've got that. Basically, you can have those abilities in your campaign. So yes, that means that much like the bard can show up and actually sing at your table, you can have someone basically show up and basically with their playlist, their cosmic playlist for the party, and play various things. That does remind me of the fact that there is a neat part of an upcoming Pathfinder adventure called Curtain Call, which deals with your party dealing with their celebrity after having done something tremendous and awesome in the past. Basically, but your characters all can have theme songs, which are assigned to them at the beginning of the adventures, and you can get bonuses for chances to play your theme song in combat, where the GM can play it to bump up a character. It's great. So what we're actually going to talk about is this thing right here. Everyone, basically, A Cosmic Birthday by Jenny Jarveski. This is the playtest adventure number 1. So what this is basically there's a series of playtest adventures which kind of push you into circumstances that they want you to test in the playtest, as well as basically, so it's a great way of introducing people to the system as well, because it's designed to kind of poke you into areas which are basically key parts of it. It's going to basically so what this one is, basically just going through, it just talks about, yes, you need player core and Pathfinder core. There will be a second playtest module, which is higher level play, called Empires Devoured, which is a kind of a follow-up to this one. And that one starts at 10th level. This one is levels 1, 2, 3. So basically the big thing, basically they've got an advancement track on basically various things that's going to take you to level 4. They should end the adventure in chapter 4 after finishing level 3, or just before your fight if you want to give them a little bit boost for the last fight. So that's great. So basically what this ends up being in terms of basically breaking this down, and let's actually turn this off and go to, basically you're going to end up with 3 distinct sections in this adventure. You have basically, they have 3 chapters set up, and they kind of explore 3 different types of scenarios. The first chapter is a very basic level 1 kind of dungeon crawl. which basically the players get sucked into a situation, and then they have to find their way out and deal with what's going on. And then the second chapter is going to be a little bit similar to what we did when we played where'd it go? Terabyte Boys, which basically it drops you into the aftermath of a terrible situation, which has kind of rocked an area, rocked a community, and you're going to basically essentially hand your players a bunch of, hey, here's a living community which is having problems. Here are some of the ways that you can help them. So some of that is going to be basically it's going to be sandboxy. Some of your players are going to be like, oh, hey, we should deal with this. Some players are going to be like, oh, we should do that. And they're going to kind of go around and essentially side quest their way around the community. So this is going to have a different feel than Terabyte Boys. Terabyte Boys obviously is a little bit more basically Terabyte Boys is very definitely anti-capitalistic. That's not to say that Starfinder isn't, but basically on a scale of anti-capitalist, basically, which ranges from Blade Runner. Blade Runner is probably near your bottom edge of anti-capitalist to Star Trek, basically original Next Generation era, basically optimistic utopian future. It's going to be a little bit more towards that optimistic utopian future. It's a little basically it has its problems. It will put you into some of those situations, but it's not going to be quite as harshly, hey, the system is basically trying to keep you down and you're just barely managing to survive and pay rent. The Terabyte Boys puts you into. Basically, Starfinder is going to assume you have a place to stay, you have a steady income, you're not just living off the streets. You basically, if you're a level 1 PC, you've kind of made it, as it were. You're here to do bigger and better things. You're here to save the world, and you're going to fall into a series of adventures which are going to save kingdoms or worlds or planets. Basically planets or space stations or starships and things like that. Whereas Terabyte Boys was very definitely about your characters may never actually be known by anyone outside their own community. But in their community, they may be heroes. In their communities, they may foil whatever gentrification plan is going down. In their own community, they're going to do that. And they're going to basically, and at the end of it, they may just barely be basically, even after doing all of that, they may still have to deal with, man, how am I going to pay rent this month? Starfinder is going to put you in more of a situation of, hey, what if you had the abilities and freedom to save people and help people? How would you use those powers? How will you interact with your environment? That's not to say you can't mix some of those ideas in. And they're going to give you scenarios and things like that where you're going to basically have to deal with, hey, we're dealing with basically there's going to be sleazy corporate empires show up, and they're going to have PowerPoint campaigns and basically give you all the reasons why we should just bulldoze this entire block. But basically, usually by the end of it, you'll discover the fact that they're run by demons or undead necromancers or something else, and that basically sometimes a lot of the times you're going to be able to beat them by punching them in the face, because at the end of it, basically that's combat. Basically, we have skill systems and you can run entire, basically they have ways of running encounters and things like that which are just entirely skill based and not combat based. A lot of your abilities are based around, hey, eventually I want to be able to punch someone in the face really hard. You have classes which are more devoted to that. But basically, Pathfinder has done a decent job, and Paizo, rather, has done a decent job of mixing some of that stuff in. So sometimes you're going to find yourself in situations where pulling out your guns isn't necessarily going to help. So, that said, let's kind of start breaking down this adventure. So, let's go ahead and create a new campaign. got a couple in here. We need to start archiving some of these so we can keep track of everything. All right, this is a cosmic birthday. Let's grab a picture from the cover here. Boop. Whoa, that's huge. Let's crop that. Let's reduce it in size by like 50%. And save that as a cover image. And then we will... let's create a new image. Upload a new image. Cosmic birthday cover. Keywords. Oops, I can spell. Starfinder 2E. Cosmic birthday. And let's go ahead and add that. There we go. That worked out nicely. Let's make a quick alt description. Face off against a multi-tentacled horror of a industrial environment, we call it. I can't spell. It's fun. Okay. Oh, I forgot to stick that in the folder. I will have to deal with that later. Okay. Now we'll go ahead and insert that. We'll go ahead and use the same thing for our... that. Deal with some of that stuff. Starfinder Second Edition. Go ahead and save. It's going to set up our campaign. So basically what it's doing this, it's setting up all of your access rights so that you have access to the campaign. It is also making sure the fact that you have your base world location. Every campaign starts off with a campaign world as it's basically its top level. We produced that one so you always have a top of the tree. For searching and hierarchy purposes, but that does basically, while you can't delete that world, you can come in here and rename this as if you want to just basically, if everything in here is on Absalom Station, you can go ahead and just rename your base to Absalom Station. Then you can, for example, whoop. Everything gets dark briefly. There we go. Grab that, and crop it, resize it by 25%. Oops, you know what? That cropped weirdly. Weird. Why'd you do that? Oh, that's probably why. Let me check. 1 second. Whoop. Try that again. Okay. Well, that's why it's acting weird, because it's dropping it weirdly onto my thing. Cool. Now let's crop. There we go. That's much better. All right. Resize. 75%. Save that as station. And then we will come here. Upload a new image. And basically, this is going to get into a little bit of, basically, we're starting to bleed. Basically, we're reaching the end of this our talk on this one. I did want to do a bit of discussing about what makes Starfinder interesting and things like that before we talk about basically the next session. We're going to dig more into what basically how we would run a Starfinder game. But the reason why I'm kind of focusing on images here is because images, especially in a science fiction game, are important, because a lot of times when you basically, if I say you see an elf and a dwarf standing over there, they're currently engaged in epic combat. Basically, the elf is a mage, basically the dwarf is a fighter, and they're engaged in epic combat against a large dragon, basically a large void dragon. So basically, some of those things you might not know about. Basically, like, you don't know what Void Dragon is. Maybe if I give spell names, you don't know what those spells do exactly. Like Electric Arc, things like that. You're like, okay, but you can kind of guess what's going on. You have a little bit of a picture in your mind forming already. Where if I say, okay, there's a Vesk envoy, basically helping the helping the Skittermander mystic basically fight off a basically a cultist or something else, basically, or some other weird monster name I pull out of the book. You're like, what? I don't know what's going on. Basically, like, oh, they're on this station. They're buried in they're in these levels, etc., etc. They're fighting a plasma moth. There you go. There's a name. Umbral Echo. Basically, some of those things you could get ideas for, but a lot of the time you're just left going, a what is fighting a who with what? And so having images in these circumstances are going to help ground your players in this world until they reach the point where you've done enough world building that, oh, hey, I understand what's going on now. And even when you've done a decent, even if you've played a ton of Starfinder, space station is such a broad concept that you're like, okay, what type of space station is it? Is it one of those like Babylon 5 circling thing, or is it more of a, is it more DS9 style like this one is, or it looks like that? I'm just gonna go ahead and save that. Normally, basically, again, if I was doing this for accessibility reasons, I would add text. And again, I forgot to change the folder. I'm bad at doing that. Let's go ahead and grab that again. But basically, these images are going to be key to, basically, for myself as a GM, understanding what's going on so I can describe it well, so that I can give input to the players and help them navigate the world that they're dealing with. And it's also going to basically give me as a GM, is also give my players something to ground onto, something to latch on, something to think back on next time I'm talking about it. And it's going to help you basically help you get that base and that grounding that science fiction games tend to, basically, that's one of the hardest part about running science fiction games, is fantasy games. Most people, even if they haven't read The Lord of the Rings, have seen or watched the movies, have seen bits and clips of it, or have heard D&D, basically, and seen images of it splashed all over the place, and so, okay, fantasy stuff, relatively easy. urban adventures, modern day stuff, werewolf, vampire, for example, or even slightly advanced stuff like we talked about with Terabyte Boys, or Shadowrun was the other one I was going with. There it is. Shadowrun or Cyberpunk and things like that. You've got to basically, someone talks about a car, even a future car, you at least have a basis for. You have a basis for what a advanced city might look like, because it's relatively grounded in what you know now. And you can deal with that world, and so you can improvise off of it a lot easier, because you're like, oh, I'm in a fantasy world. I can pick up a rock and chuck a rock at the dragon, or I could go into the town and I know that there's an inn, a stable, a blacksmith, and I will be able to, my character would know and be able to interact with those things. Cool. If I'm playing a modern adventure, I know basically I could go talk to that the police are coming, and they may have problems. Basically, these characters may have problems with the police. We may need to avoid them if we're running on one side of the law or not. Or hey, the military is coming in. Oh, that's an escalation. That means something. Or we're in a particular part of the city which is basically a little bit more gentrified, has nice things. You know what you can interact with. You know, there's street lights and other things, and your character can work with that. And you can play in those situations, and your players can help play off of that, and you're not having to. Whereas, okay, you're in a futuristic space city on a planet that's run by skittermanders. What do things look like? Do they have streetlights? Do they all have basically? Oh wait, no, they all have dark vision. Maybe they don't have streetlights or something like that. Oh, okay. What does a Yosoki planet look like? What does the Yosoki section of a city look like? All of those things, you're going to have to spend the time to build it up in their minds, so that your players can run with it. So that your players can be able to basically take these things and be able to go, oh yeah, I know the fact that basically we may be in Little Akaton, but I want to go to, I know there's the Swordlight Cathedral. I want to basically, if I'm going to more holy stuff, the Click Clack Club, if I'm going for more gambling stuff, or Drifters, and basically I want my character to basically be from the wrong side of town in Drifter's End. Or hey, if you're looking for a militaristic, really strictly run section, you're going to end up in the Vesk Quarter, because they're going to give that information to your players, and so you're going to feed all of that information. So basically, maps are important. Being able to have maps so you can look at them, being able to do things like what I could do when I'm in a tier above world tier. Basically, we have the ability to add hotspots to maps. So if I add locations, so if I come down here and I say, let's quickly create Lakaton. Now I can click on the map and add a hotspot for Little Akaton. Cool. Let's move that slightly as it's blocking. Yep. So basically, this is going to make it easier for me to bounce around and basically answer questions for my players, basically as to what stuff is. Now, this is basically, of course, this is a lot of me talking to my players and basically telling them things and providing them information. And my players are having to record all this information, things like that. It would be much easier if we could do things like share it with our players. If basically instead of just me writing all this information down and having to read it to them and then having to have them copy it down and then they make their own notes and I don't know what they're noting or anything like that, or I don't know what they want their characters to do, basically sharing this information with your players is going to be key. Basically, providing them the images of, hey, this is what a Vesk looks like, this is what a Skittermander looks like, and having them being able to look up that information when I'm talking about something else would be really useful. And basically, when we've been talking with players and getting feedback from people during our early access testing time, we've come to realize that is a really important part of adventures like this. And so that's why player sharing is one of the first new features we're adding to Lorelink. First major features. We've had lots of little minor features like maps and things like that. But one of the first major features we're adding is player sharing. And so next week, if everything goes well, basically the features are still in development, so I'm the one developing it, so I'm making promises on my own bank account, my own time account, as it were. We'll be able to show off some of those features in terms of, hey, here's what your players are going to see when they log into the system. Here's what they can look like. Here's what you can hide for them. Here's what notes they can make. Here's some of the stuff we have for security, because when you're sharing stuff with players, or you're putting yourself out on the internet, and that means that security becomes a little bit more important. Because you don't want someone else getting hold of your link and publishing it out there, and then everybody flooding in and putting weird notes on your adventure, or dealing with harassment, things like that. We are aware of what the world looks like and what that means, and so I need to show off those features as well. So all of that to say, we're starting basically that is where we will pick up again next week as I build more into this, get more into actually building out a Cosmic Birthday in Lorelink, showing off basically, hey, here's the information I'm going to put in, here's the information I'm going to hide from my players, so they don't see it. Here's how your players can add notes and other stuff to things. Here's how I can add notes and make them secret. So that will be next week. So check back in on August 20th, and you will be able to check us out then. And then on the Friday of that week, which will be next week, we will be doing an actual play where I will be running a Cosmic Birthday with the Lorelink crew. So they will they'll be able to hop in. Basically, we'll be able to run them through this adventure, and you'll be able to see them basically looking at stuff, and I'll be able to hopefully share stuff with them so they can be looking things up. So they can be going, what are the Vesk again? What do the Skittermanders look like? When you say Shireen, what does that mean? All of that stuff. Hopefully, hopefully all that stuff will come together for that. And I'll be able to show that off when we play that on again August 23rd. So again, basically, if you're curious about our schedule, there it is. Basically, so 13th, that's today. We're running basically planning it. Continuing to plan it is next week on the 20th. The 23rd at 1 p.m. is when we're going to be playing it. And then the 27th, after we get through all that, going to take a little bit of a break, and we're going to go to a different kind of future, which is definitely a little bit more grim and dark and, well, dirty and filthy. We're going to try to clean it up a bit in the Warhammer 40k Power Wash Simulator. Tony and I are going to play that. So, all of SK. So, that's a lot coming up. So if you want to know more about that, go ahead and throw this channel a follow, and then Twitch will take care of letting you know when we are streaming, in case there's surprise streams, because there's always a chance that one of the other Lorelink crew could be like, hey, I want to stream more of this or X or Y, so they might pop in. And the only way for you to find out about those basically streams is to either basically follow us here on this channel. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel, and that will also give you indications when we basically have live streams and things like that. Also, that lets you pick up streams that we are running as we are basically streams. If you've popped in halfway, you want to come back and reference this, take a look at something, or see any of the other stuff that we've run in the past, check out that YouTube channel. Basically, if you want to basically say, hey, I think what you're doing is cool, I want to know more, basically I want to support you and basically encourage you to keep doing it, you can go ahead and throw us basically a subscription here on Twitch. If you have Amazon Prime, you could use the Amazon Gaming to throw us essentially $5 of Jeff Bezos' money. Always cool. And there is basically it'll give you emotes. Thank you, 20, for reminding me. Basically, subscribing to the channel also gives you cool emotes, like our basically our dice jail emotes and things like that. I don't have the emote wall set up on this thing, and I need to do that. Oh well. Normally there'd be bouncing emotes going all over the stream, but I don't have it set up on this one. But you can see how basically you can check the chat to see what cool emotes we have. Additionally, basically, if you're wanting to find out basically more about what we're planning and more details about upcoming events, or basically things like, hey, we're starting to give away basically starting to come out of early access our world tier level, which is the free level, which essentially gives you the ability to create campaigns, only limiting you a few things. You don't get map hotspots, you don't get templates, things like that, but all the rest of Lorelink is available to free for you. You can check that out on our Get Started page. Also on that very same page, if you want to find out more about the events like that, we have a newsletter. You can just sign up for the newsletter, and once a month, or maybe twice if we're doing something cool, like say releasing stuff, releasing higher level tiers out of early access for the public. Basically, subscribe to that newsletter, and it'll get you that information. If you're like, hey, I want to know more up to the minute things, and I'm willing to deal with basically social media to get it. We have social media accounts. We don't have one on the thing on the bird, which is dead. We do have them on the butterfly, Blue Sky. We do have them on Facebook. It's basically Instagram. All of those we have accounts on currently, and those are live and active and up to date. So if you subscribe, follow, whatever the words on those things are, you will get up-to-date information on all of it. Up-to-date information. So if you're like, oh, hey, I wonder if they're doing something. Oh, cool, there's an announcement on the social media site. Or if you want to take part in some cool conversations and things like that, that'll be there. We will soon have we have a Discord currently. It is not. We are slowly kind of edging into making it publicly available. We are slowly bringing people and users into it. So if we ever go fully public, that will be a place to find out about it. Same with the newsletter. Eventually we'll make it public, and there'll be a command on on our Twitch stream for that. But hey, the public is a weird place, and so we like making sure we have a good community before we dump more and more people into it. That's just the way it is. All right. I think that covers just about everything. So thank you all for watching. Thank you for chatting. Thank you for listening. And we will catch you all next week for part 2 of Starfinder Second Edition playtest. See you then.